Alrighty, and we're on. So I'm sitting here today with Vanessa Hadchiti. Say hello, Vanessa.
Hi. Johnny, you said that so well too, the surname.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Well, so funnily enough, but just before we started the podcast, I was actually asking Vanessa, did she have a Michael in her family somewhere? And the reason why I asked that is because I've been doing a lot of sports commentary, so like commentating at live boxing events and things like that. And so one of the boxers that I've had to commentate for, his name is Michael Hadchiti.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, so he's a boxer.
He's a boxer, yeah.
Oh,
he's actually, I think he's the New South Wales light heavyweight champion at the moment.
Oh, well, I'm going to have to go meet him.
Yeah.
If we have someone that's infamous in our family.
Yeah. So, interestingly enough, like, when is it? The 16th, yeah, 16th, he's fighting again, and I'll be at that event commentating. So that's how it's like I've gotten very good at, whenever I go and commentate these events, I go and ask people, okay, how do I pronounce the surname? How do I pronounce this? Because I'd feel embarrassed, to say it wrong the whole time, especially if, throughout the whole fight, you're calling them the wrong name. Like,
True. Well, I think I have to say that you did get warmed up after the, federal election last year and knowing me a little.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know Vanessa, so Vanessa, you're a podiatrist, right?
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of humanitarian things that I want to talk to you about. But we ran, together. We were partners, I guess, so to speak, in the federal election last year, and we built a really good network of people, which was fantastic. And a lot of us we're all still in contact, really, to be honest. Like, I think our core group, especially in the Sydney area, so me having run in the Senate, I got to go to a lot of people's events, and then Vanessa, unfortunately, couldn't actually end up running, right?
Yeah, because of my dual citizenship,
Yeah.
unfortunately. A few complications there, but it couldn't be resolved in time.
Yep.
So fortunately, there was another candidate that could step in, and I just stayed in the back seat and continued the campaign and supported them.
Yep.
So it wasn't a total loss.
No, and look, I think, you built great relationships with a lot of the members and people in the area as well. Like, people were very complimentary of how you conducted yourself. And I think, like, that's testament to somebody's character. Like, I think, it's not just about, like, I think a lot of people get caught up in the idea that, it's all about winning, right? But if it's all about winning, unfortunately, all you get in terms of people that want to, run things is people that just want to win. They don't want to actually consider, all different perspectives and actually think about, what is the right character to apply, or, what are the right character traits to have in a government that you want to form.
Yeah, that's true.
So I guess, because we already started on the whole political avenue, let's talk a little bit about that, and then we'll wind it back and we'll start talking a bit more about life and your life and things like that. So
Sure.
You're actually continuing the fight.
Surprisingly, yes.
Yeah. In the upcoming New South Wales state election.
Yeah.
So for those that are obviously in New South Wales, we've got an upcoming state election. It's a little bit different, obviously we had a federal election last year, and that was, I guess, one of the key, I guess, delineators between federal politics and state politics is what are the issues that you focus on. Federal politics is always geared around things like defence. It can be geared around, energy, like all these sorts of things that govern, I guess, our policies as a nation. And then state politics, is fairly different in its focus. It's typically focused around things like like education, transport, infrastructure, health. Yeah, health is a big one. You're obviously in the health sector. So I guess for you, what made you decide, okay, I'll give this another crack, or at least I'll keep my name out there, so to speak.
So after the federal election, and that was complete, it was somewhat disheartening that the results did not really translate from the support we had on the ground. So and the efforts too, I was a bit confused about how, following the pandemic and the frustration amongst citizens, and it didn't really lead to more support for the minor parties that are trying to advocate for more citizenship rights in terms of, just their freedom and their access to things that they're entitled to. But having said that, it wasn't the case that it was over then. I continued to still have interest in where things were moving, keeping my finger on the pulse with policies that were coming out or how things were changing, especially on a health perspective, regarding the vaccination, regarding COVID, and regarding the outcomes and how things were unfolding. It was quite intriguing to me, and statistics and research papers were continuously being released. So for me, I was still very interested. And there was an event that Natalie Duma, who was also running for United Australia Party in the federal election, her and myself were, during the campaign, initiated a monthly event whereby we just invited members and, people that supported United Australia Party to come along. And once the federal election was over, Natalie Duma decided to continue the monthly events. I backed down because it was no longer really my vicinity as well, because I wasn't an official endorsed candidate, but she had interest in the area. So it continued, and we ended up not necessarily, it kind of phased out from being a United Australia Party event to just being freedom fighters or freedom supporters. And so it attracted a mix of people, and it grew. And with that, other political members came along. And there were people from IMOP and, One Nation, or, Liberal Democrats. And with that, conversations started, and during the progress, it became that United Australia Party couldn't run for the state election. However, Liberal Democrats were running, and they put a call out to who would be interested. And at that time, I decided, let me look into their manifesto more closely and see if I really do sort of support their values and what they're fighting for. And I looked at it, and there was not one point on there which I disagreed with. No, everything they said was logical. It made sense to me. And so then I decided I'll put my hand up and my name down to be a candidate. And so this time, though, I selected an area which was closer to my home, being Canterbury, whereas previously I was running the campaign in the city, which was quite difficult and outside of my usual everyday life. And then, here I am for the state election. And, I'm really sort of, once again, I did it before to support a greater movement, that we have a better government, people in there representing the population wholeheartedly. I've really lost faith in the current MPs and, decisions and legislations being made. So I'm hoping that by putting my hand up, and other people can also put their hand up, we make a change that may not be immediate, but in 10 years' time, I'd like to think Australia is being governed by MPs that genuinely care for the people, rather than their retirement fund or their salaries or, power.
It's I think that was a very common theme, for us all for the federal election last year, where, we sort of looked at it, and part of the reason why we decided that we were going to participate in this kind of a campaign was because, we looked at what was happening, for those who are watching, it's
welcome to the ethnic family.
Vanessa's mum doing some filming for us, some behind the scenes, but in the scenes. Sorry, yes. That's all right.
Look, all ethnic listeners out there would understand this.
They'd absolutely resonate with this. So, so, part of the reason why, there was such a groundswell of support from that perspective was, people had been looking at, what had been going on in terms of governance, corruption, all of these sorts of things. And people, obviously felt compelled that, hey, perhaps the direction that we're going is wrong. And that's, part of the reason why I decided to do it. Like, I just, was looking at the decisions that were made. And I know that a lot of those decisions were actually made at a state-based level. So, I commend you for obviously standing up and putting your hand up again, because I think, a lot of candidates probably walked away from that federal election campaign quite disheartened. For me, I was already in quite an untenable position to win. So it was never really necessarily about winning for me, but it was the fact that at least I stood up for my principles and I could do whatever I could to support you guys. So, and the reason why I say that is because for those people that don't understand, I was running in the Senate. So on the Senate ballot sheet, there were six available positions. And so, you might have 2 from the Liberal Party, 2 from the Labor Party, 1 from wherever else. So typically, because majority of people vote above the line, it will only be the person that's number one on the Senate ticket that would typically get in, or one or two if you're from one of the larger parties. So the position that I was in, I was number 5 on the Senate ticket. So for me, it was going to be very difficult from the outset to, get an opportunity to do it. But at the same time, when I discussed it with my wife, it's like, when else are you going to get a chance to run in a federal election like this? It's an experience, right? And one of the things that I'm very big on is that, life is really about experiences. I think people focus too much on the end goal, that you get fixated on this end goal, but then once you achieve it or you realize it, you then ask yourself, well, now what? Right?
Yeah, and I think, I'm not sure how many, you probably had the feedback, but from my perspective, I thought, you're a wonderful speaker, but wholeheartedly invested in the decision you made to run in the federal election was purely for the population, and not for self-gain. And that's a rare asset, or, a trait to see in people. And the fact that you were there supporting every candidate at every event was tiresome, and it was a lot of work, and I commend you for that.
Thanks, Vanessa.
And with all of that, and knowing that, you knew the outcome was still going to be unsuccessful to get voted in, but yet you did not reduce your effort. And that alone is a testament to your character too, which is why I think in the next federal election, everyone should vote for you.
Look, politics is very interesting. Like, I think it's one of those things that people get like the hair on the back of the neck stands up, and people get their backs up about these things because, and I think there's probably even like almost like an evolutionary aspect to it, right? Like, I think if you think about politics and you go back, say, 1,000 years or something like that, like when even if you think about ancient Greek civilization, right? Like, if you didn't like somebody politically, it was probably grounds that you were going to get murdered or assassinated or poisoned or something like that.
That's right.
So I'm thankful for that. In today's age, that's less likely to happen.
Yeah.
Won't say it'll never happen because, I remember, growing up and there was Australia's first political assassination had happened in Cabramatta or something like that.
That's right.
Yeah, right. So I won't say that it doesn't happen anymore, but I think now, it's sort of shifted very, very much so where it's like, it's a character assassination.
True. It's defamation, and that doesn't make it any, I think, less criminal. I think at the end of the day, if you don't conduct yourself morally, you have a lot to answer for, because you're not only hurting another person, but their family and the circle of people around them. And so it's something that needs to end. We need to start being less concerned with defamation in order to get ourselves ahead, and which is what the political parties do to each other. I think if you are so confident you can do a good job, then why are you looking to your left and right and, throwing garbage at someone?
Yeah.
You just need to move forward.
Yeah. It's the saying, losers focus on winners, but winners focus on winning.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And I think we did that well with, the election last year. And I really hope people do somewhat stand behind the minor parties this year. I'm endorsed by Liberal Democrats, and they have candidates in many electorates. And there are also other minor parties that are just as, worthy of votes. And I really want people to just stop the habit of being so repetitive with either Liberal or Labor. They need to start thinking outside the box, because we'll never see change if they resort to habitual voting, which is what we've seen really for so many decades.
Yeah. It's interesting, I think there's almost like this mindset of you don't want to have a hung government, so to speak.
True.
Because nothing gets done. But then what happens if the rate of actions or decisions that are made barrel down this pathway that you don't agree to, right? And that's actually, where you do want the bureaucracy to sort of come in and say, hey, perhaps we should think about this a little bit more. Perhaps we need to consider the perspectives of some of these Australians and some, and so that's one of the things that, although it sounds like a horrible thing that, perhaps decisions don't get made as quickly as they should be, I think when you're talking about, the livelihoods and the lives of so many people, when you're talking about a population, a country, a state, you can't afford to make decisions so rashly.
Oh, of course. And I think sometimes we are constantly looking to create paperwork. I mean, this country is a prime example of many regulations, a lot of red tape, and it's really burdening people, especially small businesses. And then once you get into like medium and large size businesses, even more. But the regulations constantly like building and piling up is bogging people down so much so that they can't get on with their everyday job. So why are we creating so many regulations? I think we can be more selective in the decisions we make so that we spend more time prioritizing what needs to be discussed. That way you can move forward and just have a lot more of an informed and scientific but also community represented decision at the end of the day.
Yeah. One of the things, so I obviously read the Lib Dems Freedom Manifesto for the election last year. I actually haven't looked at what they've got upcoming for the state election, but as you said, a lot of their points, they're very well thought out. They're very logical. And I guess, for people that don't really understand what the Liberal Democrats are about, like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but, from what I read into it is basically, they believe that, government should be small from the first perspective, because at the end of the day, what do you really want the government to do? You want them there so that they can provide infrastructure, right? So infrastructure and probably social welfare are probably the two key things that a government can sort of provide. So whether it's, roads and health infrastructure, or it's looking after, helping to look after Australians that might be disadvantaged, or whatever the case may be. But aside from that, you sort of want them to get out of the way.
That's right. And how many of us can really say that they've had 24 hours that have passed without somehow feeling like nervous that in one way or another they're doing something wrong? And you just have to think about your drive to work, how many cameras at every intersection. And you be a safe driver, but then at that moment you have to look down at your speedometer just to double check. And, that is a thought process then and there that has disrupted your sort of, peaceful state, and then put in something else that may be like, I guess, not sure what else it might be, but there's always paperwork pending at the back, especially for business owners. There's always, have they lodged this? Have they done that? Have they done this for payroll? Have they, dotted their I's, crossed their T's? And it makes many business owners nervous. Am I doing something wrong? Especially when it comes to hiring people. They don't know anymore. They can't keep up with the constant changes to employee rights and employer rights. And how do you find the time for that? And not every small business can hire someone to manage human resources. It's a very expensive exercise. So I think we need to simplify it. And I think that point where you keep the government small, have that translate down to also keeping the laws simple, keeping regulations simple, so everyday people can keep up and focus on the job rather than focusing on the paperwork, which doesn't translate to better customer service.
Well, it's funny because I think, one of the things that I've realized about human nature, and it doesn't matter whether it's business, it could be religion, it could be anything that people get into, right? So let me use this as an example. So let's talk about a company, right? So a person that starts a company, typically they start that company because they want to make money, right? And then by growing that company, they can then probably have more employees, which is a great thing because now they're providing a workplace for other people. And what happens is that these employees, they want to grow as well. They want to get promoted. They want to earn more money. So they're all working to grow that company as well, right? So that they, as the company grows, they might become the manager or, might get shares and become partner or something like that. And so everybody is so invested into making this organization grow that it gets to the point where it's so big and so unwieldy that it sort of plows along and still does its thing, but it wasn't as agile or as nimble as what it was when it first started, right? And the same thing applies to government, right? Like, so, when people go and they work in government, they go, okay, well, I need to add some portfolios and some ministerial positions so that I can obviously increase my pay and grow and do those sorts of things. And then it's like, oh, but if we just grow government, then there'll be more opportunities for all of us, right? Sounds, like it's very logical how it happens, but then you have this system then where people are just creating, like they're creating a job for themselves just so that there is a job. you know, rather than
Exactly.
addressing the core situation. So, you know, another great example would be like homelessness, right? We pay all this money into fixing homelessness, but the problem, you know, is still there. We haven't managed to eradicate it. And I know it's probably not as big of an issue in Australia, but it's a huge issue in America. And it's become its own industry where there's all these people making six-figure salaries to address the homeless situation, but it doesn't get any better. It gets worse.
That's right. I think there's also a lot of, I'm not sure, I mean, this is a personal opinion, so I could be off the mark, but because I do travel a bit and I see sort of, especially because my background is Lebanese, I've been to Lebanon as well, and other sort of countries, from developing countries to well-developed countries. And I sometimes try and compare, and there are certain things, like in Australia we have homelessness. Of course it's not rampant, but I took the opportunity to talk to people who are homeless, especially during the last campaign, because I was interested to know what was happening in the city as to why people were homeless. And I got talking to quite a handful of them, and there was a question that I specifically asked to understand more firsthand. Is it a case of just not having enough housing? Or, you know, are they not being provided adequate customer service that supports them to getting, you know, public housing? So I would ask each one, if tomorrow you were provided with a shelter, with a home that you could live in, would you? And they said no. And at some point they did have a home, but they have chosen to leave the home. And once they have, and usually if you're seeing them on the streets, they often choose that. And that is, I think it's important to remember that, because they don't want your pity. They want dignity. It's important to treat them just like you and I. They haven't missed out. They have made a choice. Circumstances in their life, for one reason or another, have been challenging. The barriers, primarily maybe whether emotional, whether it's family or friends, circumstances have really just challenged them, that they've decided to really become more of solo residents living outside your traditional compound. There is nothing wrong with that. It's a different type of lifestyle. Fortunately for each one that I met, I also asked about meals, and they said that they have enough, 3 meals a day. There's always charitable organisations that come at a structured time and day. They know where they are and they go get their meals, because they said, no, I don't need food, don't bring food. I have enough and there's nowhere to store it anyway. It gave me a different perspective on homeless people, and there's one in particular that I became friends with. He was a really nice guy, and I went back to visit him only 3 weeks or 4 weeks ago, and he was still there doing well, and he's so interested in my, political movements, and so he doesn't know yet I'm running as a candidate for Liberal Democrats. But I sit there and I have a conversation with him, and it's really interesting what you can learn from their life experiences and what took them there. And not every homeless person has some sort of mental health condition that makes them unapproachable or a safety risk. I think it's important as citizens, we treat them as equal community members and have that conversation with them, because really, ultimately, they just want to be treated equally. And that for me is important, because it touches on other interests that I have, humanitarian. And so I think, we've steered off topic here, but homelessness is an issue whereby, back to government, it's not just about money and it's not just about housing. It's about what was the situation culturally growing up that led them down the path of being homeless.
For these people to tap out of society and say, hey,
right.
I don't want to participate.
Exactly. And so we need to start saying, okay, well, by closing up the city more, making businesses almost have to be shut by 10 for noise regulations, making people feel less need to go out and mingle. They have less interaction socially. That's unhealthy, because what ends up doing is it makes everyone stay indoors. And that can then, for certain people who don't have that circle of friends, they can become lonely. So I feel that right now the government doesn't make decisions based on reality. They just make it based on numbers, and numbers is not the answer to everything. You need to have a bit more of a humanitarian approach rather than just a funding approach to everything.
Well, sometimes it's not just numbers, it's also signaling, like it's
True.
trying to make us look like we're doing something, because doing something is better than doing nothing, so to speak.
That's right.
And I guess, the reason why I think about that is because, like now it's like there's a lot of obviously, like even in news.com.au, there was a report the other day about like 10 COVID misconceptions that were, touted to everybody as being true, but have now been debunked and blah, 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 blah. And I sent it to one of my friends because, we obviously had some vigorous debates about vaccines and things like that. And, his comment back to me was, nobody should be castigated for making decisions based on the available information at the time. And it's like, yeah. And likewise, nobody should have been castigated in the first place for whatever decision they made, right? Like it's a two-way street, from that perspective. But I think the bigger question then is like, so what level of comfort do you have in the government deciding what you should and shouldn't be able to do? Where is that line drawn, right? Because I think typically for most people, that line is drawn when there's a fear of a threat of harm to somebody else. Like if what you're doing does not hurt another person, well, that's probably the most fundamental thing, that you're not doing something that's going to kill somebody or, threaten somebody, so to speak, or cause physical harm. And then, then we get into the blurrier lines of, when you start talking about mental illness and mental health and all those sorts of things. But it was just very interesting because, I think, and I'm always very big on this idea that we as people, as humans, have like this personal responsibility, right? Like we all have this own personal responsibility, whether it's to our family, to our friends, to ourselves, to our children. We have this level of personal responsibility that we all take on board, right? And typically the only, in day-to-day interactions nowadays, everything is fairly amicable, aside from maybe, having an argument with somebody maybe at a traffic light or something like that. Like that's probably the height of people's, confrontational stuff,
true.
right? Or whether it's a misunderstanding in a workplace. Like they're the most common places where you're going to have conflict nowadays. Unless you talk about politics, in which case, every conversation can be can be a battle, right? But like I just think it's very interesting how people view that sort of stuff. And part of the reason why I bring that up is because, one of the things that I did when I was campaigning last year was like I would go and have conversations with people on the street and, just ask them questions. And like it was always very interesting, like the way people respond to you if you introduced yourself first as a candidate versus if you just had a conversation first and then you brought it up afterwards. Yeah. Right? And so this is one of the things that I think is really important, and we've probably done it the wrong way around. We shouldn't have led with the political stuff. We should have just talked about life first. But, I just think, people need to learn how to separate those two things, right? And not be straight away. It's like, okay, this is political. Okay. It's like when the salesperson calls you on the phone and it's like, oh, hello, I'd like to talk to you about your energy bill. And you go, oh, I'm not interested. Yeah. Right. Whereas if they acted like they knew you, they might even get a bit further. Right, which is probably why scammers actually do well.
That's a good point.
Right, because the scam, so, and I'll share this story while I'm thinking about it because I had a scammer ring me, and it was a lady, and she rang up and she said, "Oh, hello, it's whoever here from Commonwealth Bank. I'm just calling you about your account. There was a transaction. We're a little bit concerned. Blah 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 blah." So and so it actually got me to engage in the conversation. And then I just, I knew it was, a bit fishy. So I just said to her, oh, okay. And which account was this one? I've got a few accounts with CBA. Can you tell me the account number or whatever? And then she's like, BS some account number. So I already knew. So I just thought, okay, I'll just keep playing with her a little bit. And then I said to her, oh, okay. Sorry, can I just check what name is this account under? Because, because I didn't answer the phone with my name, and she gave me like some BS name, right? She was just clutching, and then so I said, "Oh, you've actually called the wrong customer here." But I'm very disappointed that Commonwealth Bank would send, have people call me or call customers without verifying, the customer's details first. What was your name again? And what's your employee number? I'd like to lodge a formal complaint. And she actually started, getting a bit, and then she's like, and then she. At one point in the conversation, she realized, why am I entertaining this guy, right? Like, I don't actually work for CBA. I just hang up on the guy. So then she hung up on me. So that was my 5 minutes of fun.
It was good you picked up on it. I really feel for the people that don't and they
Yeah.
get scammed so much money. And there's so much of it now. It's frustrating.
Yeah, they target everything.
Yeah, Facebook is a big one right now, the Facebook Marketplace.
Yeah.
If you want to, because I like to use it, it's so easy, post and buy on there.
Yep.
So everything that I don't want, I'll just put it on there to sell.
Yep.
And then at the moment, there's a scam going. So every time you post anything to sell, which requires pickup,
Yeah.
you'll straight away get someone showing interest. And the classic line is, I'm interested, I want you to secure it, but, I can't come pick it up. I'm going to send my son or daughter or wife tomorrow.
Yeah.
But, I'll pay for it now. What is your pay ID?
Yeah.
And at first when I saw it, I thought, no, I don't even have pay ID. I mean, I'm that old school.
Yeah.
I dismissed it. But then once I got it twice or three times, I realized, hang on, this is definitely a scam. And I thought, for people that do, they would have divulged their, pay ID, but then they would have extracted your street address to pick up the item. And then they would have probably got your phone number so they can call you on approach. And they probably got all the details just to move forward. And I think, oh my gosh, how many people fall for this? And it's so unfortunate. But it's never going to stop. You track, you stop one, another one pops up. And unfortunately, it's a, adverse event of all this digital technology. Yeah, but I haven't been scammed badly up to now. So I just hope it's not going to come at me and I'm going to be embarrassed to admit it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look at, it's one of those things I think, everybody gets targeted at some point, right? And it's just about, okay, you got to be a little bit smart in terms of how you approach it. Or if you're not sure, just don't participate. It's one of those things. All right, let's wind it all back. Let's talk about what life was like growing up for Vanessa. So were you born here or?
I was born, so my parents, born and raised in Lebanon.
Yep.
They got married, I think around 77.
Yep, okay.
In Lebanon.
Yep.
Then they migrated to Australia and from there we were born.
Okay.
So myself, I was born here in Canterbury Hospital.
Hey.
Yeah, and then spent, at the age of 4, my parents decided maybe the civil war was over in Lebanon because that's why they migrated in the first place.
Ah, okay.
So it was in the late 70s and then thereon there was a civil war. So once they felt like it may have settled and ended, they packed up and at that point there was 3 kids. They moved back to Lebanon and stayed there till the age of 7. Okay. And then the war had come back, so my parents decided to come back and live in Australia. So there was about 3 years I spent in Lebanon. So I did 2 years of my early schooling there.
Yep.
And
what was that like?
It was
Do you remember
interesting.
much?
No, surprisingly. I remember getting hit on the hand with a ruler. It's that classic traditional, discipline. But I don't remember much. I remember spending, because my grandparents had, lived in the village, so we spent a lot of time in the village. So I remember vague memories of, scenery. There was no toilet back then, so if you needed to go, you'd go squat amongst the farm animals and find a leaf to wipe yourself. And this could be in the middle of the night. I remember, though, because the war had already restarted when we were there, you'd stand outside and you'd watch the, red sparks move across the sky, which were, the, missiles being thrown between. You take a walk with I remember walking with my father down the street to the shop and, you would kind of, then he'd say, oh, the guy that's here, he died yesterday. So you would have the bullet holes, you would have the evidence there, but I don't remember personally ever being at close call, but it was definitely there and the signs were all there. So it was quite interesting. I think from one perspective, it humbled me to appreciate that people live a certain way. And when I came back to Australia and grew up here, initially it was a bit, terrifying because I enrolled in grade 2. English was not my primary language. So I remember we had some assistance with English lessons at the school. And then it was a bit tricky because I went to St. Luke's Revesby. And at the time, that area was primarily Anglo-Saxon, the whole area. And the class was all primarily Australian, like Anglo-Saxon Australians. And there was only myself and 2 other girls that were ethnic.
Yeah.
So for all of primary school, we were really the minority, and we were somewhat outcasted as, you know, not the common girl or the girl that could fit in. So that for me was not a socially positive time. You know, I just kind of cruised along, but then you could feel the soft bullying, even a couple of the teachers, you can tell they were biased. They didn't really have value for all the kids equally. You know, certain kids they held more value for. And then until we got to year 6, whereby we had really 2 good teachers. They were very sort of down to earth, humble, and they can, by that point, that was the final year of primary school. The teachers, I think maybe some of the students have brought it to their attention, because this was now years and years of accumulation, and it's the same grade moving along with each other. So then they pulled up the girls that had been doing all the sort of bullying, and, you know, it was really good in a way to see that justice served right before primary school finished, because it was a reminder that just patience would eventually result in an outcome that was in your favour. But more so, it kind of reinforced that there are some good teachers out there. And yes, there are some teachers that aren't, but it was good to, you know, have that. And then high school became emergence of a few primary school.
Yep.
So then you had a lot
Bigger
more,
groups.
more options of who you could befriend, a lot more ethnic girls, Asian, and, you know, so naturally then you found in that school everyone, you know, merged with people that were of similar background to them.
Birds of a feather.
Yeah. So that was fine. And then from there on, things changed socially and carried on to, you know, high school and university. And, yeah, it was really good. Growing up, I'd say I'm kind of the grey person. You know, I don't, you know, bring attention to myself, and I don't go out targeting anyone either. You know, as long as I'm just, I guess you could think of me as the person that you always saw smiling. You know, I got by the end of year 10, there was awards given out unofficially by peers to every student as to what they were most remembered for. And mine was for smiling. So I guess if I'm remembered for anything, I'm that.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, and
so then what kind of a student were you? Were you a good student?
I was studious,
You were
yeah.
studious?
I gave it my best.
Yeah.
I liked studying. I liked learning. And I was more steered towards maths, physics, like numbers.
Yep.
So I really enjoyed it, but then I also had a lot of interest for creativity. So I enjoyed doing art, and it came natural to me. So I could, you know, put together a drawing really quickly, and I would get a good mark for it as well.
Yeah, wow.
So I found that high school really entertained both of those interests for me well. And I'm definitely not a sports person. You don't want to try and see me kick a ball.
Yep.
I guess I didn't also have that hobby outside of school growing up.
Yep.
You know, being one of 4 children to an immigrant family, I think you'd understand, but time is limited, resources and money. It's not like today where, you know, everyone's got a hobby 2 or 3. So I didn't grow up with a hobby, and I think that probably didn't help me acquire the skills needed. And the coordination. And then later I tried to make up for it and play sports at an older age, soccer. But yeah, I didn't do too well, but I'm glad I got it out of my system. And I realized it wasn't my talent and my calling.
Yeah, fair enough. So in terms of the siblings, so are you the oldest? Or
Second eldest, yeah. 3 girls, 1 boy.
Oh, wow. And what's the boy? Where's he fit in?
He comes after me.
After you. So
and we're all quite close though. Like basically we're all within 5 years. So 4 kids within 5 years. It was just one after the other.
Yeah.
So growing up, we were really, because we were all in a similar situation whereby we were not so much immigrants because we were born here, but the area we lived in was primarily not maybe of common similarities to us. We all had the similar challenges. So because we were all the same age or similar, we were each other's friends growing up.
Yeah.
So after school, it was company of each other, and then we would be playing in the backyard or taking the bike out, and they were the good old days, which, you know, whereby that threat wasn't so much there, and that paranoia or that security and risk issue wasn't there, you could go out a lot more. And and we trailed each other. My sister would then help me with, the older sister would help me with school, because she just did the test last year.
Yep.
And then same, I would then help my brother. He was only a year below me.
Yeah.
And then the last one got, everyone's
Everything.
help. Yeah. So we found that we leaned on each other a lot, and we helped each other, and we complemented each other's weaknesses, because where one would maybe not be so good at something, we would look at the person above us to say, well, if they can do it, I can do it, and we'll keep trying. So we indirectly place that sort of standard and pave the way for the following sibling to come through. So fortunately, we all ended up being studious, all went to university,
Yep.
did our courses, all very different, but I chose to go down the path of health.
Yep.
And I did podiatry.
So I'm just a little bit curious about, the sibling dynamic. Did you guys ever fight? Or do you remember any notable fights?
Fight, like bickering and, fight. Like my brother had a hobby of karate.
Yep.
So, we would just suddenly his, opponents every day after school. And so we learned to toughen up quite well. My sister, we're all generally, we're not princesses in our family. The girls learned to toughen up.
Yep.
And, play fight, you could say. And not like today, I guess, where there's a lot of, emphasis placed on looking good amongst teenagers. We were like, who can win that fight, or who can climb that tree to the highest and jump off the cubby house. It was very playful. So, we definitely fought.
Yep.
But even up to now as adults, we have never fought like blood, sweat and tears. No, it's always like, a bicker or a debate.
And get over it after.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I'm always curious about that, because my kids, they fight like crazy.
Yeah, no, it's natural and it's healthy, because I think it helps them to learn about each other as well.
Yeah, my kids are savages. My eldest Cadence, she pushed my son. So my son Harley's the second one. Pushed him over, but like he must have landed funny, and his arm was like he's injured his elbow, and like he wouldn't lift up his arm for like 2-3 days, and in the end, like I sort of had this feeling that it was probably like a little bit dislocated. But like I looked at it, it wasn't swollen or anything like that. And then I think it was like a few days later, took him to swimming, and after swimming, like he hadn't used his arm. So I was like, okay, it's probably definitely dislocated. So I've just done a quick manipulation, heard it click back in as I've adjusted it. And then that afternoon, I think we went to our in-laws that afternoon, and he was fine, using his arm like normal, no pain, nothing. And I'm like, oh my goodness, the poor guy's just had like a dislocated arm for 3 days.
And everyone just ignored him.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we didn't ignore him, but it was just like every time you touch it, he'd complain.
Yeah.
So it was just like because I'd had enough of seeing him, not use his arm. I just basically quickly grabbed it, and I just said, I just asked him a question, and then I've just quickly manipulated and popped it back in.
That's pretty good thinking. I mean, because you don't come from a background of health.
So yeah, look. So when I was doing throughout, I did 21 years of kung fu in my life, and my master was also a guy who does physiotherapy as well. So I actually learnt a lot from him. So yeah, and he still runs a very successful clinic, and his son Eddie's one of my mates. His son Eddie ended up studying chiro and physio, so he did both, so that he could obviously run the clinic as well. And I think the younger brother Andrew's also doing it as well. But yeah, so when I was doing kung fu, I used to also watch a lot of the clinic stuff as well.
Right.
And so if somebody got injured at training, then I'd try and help and do that sort of stuff. So I sort of learnt how to do some things, and I also actually studied massage therapy as well. So I got
more about this.
I got a lot of qualifications that I don't actually put on my resume, because it's just random. So it's I had a real estate license at one point.
Oh, wow.
Don't put that on the resume. Yeah, the TAFE massage therapy course. Don't put that on the resume. So yeah, it was just I think at one point I was a licensed migration agent. Don't put that on the resume. Yeah, a lot of these things were just things like, oh, my parents were like, oh, you should go do this. I was like, okay. My mum was a real estate agent at one point, so I was like, okay, I'll go get my real estate license. And then didn't really go into real estate. I just, started working in automotive and just was there for the majority of my life. So that's sort of what happened for me. But getting back to you.
I'm actually finding your life more interesting than mine.
when you finished high school, like, did you have any idea what you wanted to do? So did you already know? Oh, I'm gonna be a podiatrist. I like feet.
It's a really funny story because my sister always pays me out up to this day on how I decided to become a podiatrist. So throughout, I mean, I think a lot of students can relate to this. You've been going to school for so many years.
Yeah.
Never really worked a professional job, and then all of a sudden you're expected to pick a career based on no exposure to anything, only by what, maybe the top 3 or 4 most common jobs are.
Yeah.
Anyway, so leading up to doing the HSC and the final exams, I still had no idea. Literally no clue. I kind of brainstormed ideas, but then I thought, it's okay, don't worry about it, Vanessa. Just keep focusing on the exam. Once you get your mark, then you can, figure out what you're going to do with the marks that are there. So then I just kept avoiding that decision and then studied hard. And then I got my TER, which at the time was 91, and I was happy with that. I thought, okay, great, this opens up a lot of options for me. But what funneled me to do what I did, so my best friend at the time, she had a seafood shop with her family. Okay. And she was like, this lady came in and she's a podiatrist. And she was saying she has 4 houses. I mean, it sounds like a good career. I think I'm going to do it. I said, okay, what do they do? Tell me about it. She's like, yeah, this is what they do. I said, all right, well, I'll keep that at the back of my mind. I'll consider it. So I kept it there as a thought. And then when I decided I don't want to do architecture, because it was that sort of merging my creativity with, structure and numbers, then I decided, I like to help people. That is something that I think I could be proud of doing as a career. It involves no BS, no sort of lying. It's just very, I guess, transparent. And I like that idea of getting up and going to work and doing a job that's wholesome. So I wanted to go into healthcare. And then once I got my mark, I thought, well, I don't want to go down the path of studying for years. Like, even if I could work my way towards being a GP or something very specialised, I don't want to study for years and years. What if I end up having a family later in a few years? It's just going to be a waste of time and then studying and resulting nowhere. So I thought I'll do an allied health course, and most of them are 4 years, and then you can go straight into work. So it really does mean you get more years out of work. Yeah. So then my first option was physiotherapy because, it's the most common. But I didn't get into physio because it required 93 TR, so I missed out.
Yep.
My next one was podiatry. And then, but the reason I came to also put that as an option was after my friend had told me about this podiatrist, I thought, okay, I need to figure out, how, it works, if it's a good career to choose. So I opened up the Yellow Pages, and back then we didn't have mobile phones. So I'm here with my Yellow Pages book. I remember at Hoyt's Cinema in Bankstown, and I was at the payphone inside the Hoyt's Cinema, and they had the Yellow Pages there, and I looked up podiatrist in the area, and then I found one that was local. I rang them. I said, when do you open? Can I, just come in? They said, yeah, no problem. So I popped in. It was just in Bankstown at the station. I popped in. I was like, just curious because I want to do podiatry. And I just kind of sneakily looked over the desk at their appointment book, and I thought, that looks quite busy without saying anything. I was like, okay, so it looks like there's work in this industry. Fortunately for me, I walked into a busy podiatry clinic. Yeah, it wasn't one that was just starting up. So it ticked the boxes of there was going to be work and it wasn't going to be a total waste of time. Feet didn't bother me, so it was no problem. And so, my sister still laughs at me till this day. She goes, you picked your course out of a phone book. Like, I mean, who does that, And then I've been doing it now for over 20 years.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, and I still, if you ask me today what other career would I have picked, I still couldn't tell you.
So I'm a little bit curious about this because, I've never been to a podiatrist, so to speak.
Yeah.
So what are the common conditions that you're treating?
Yeah, it's a very common question. Even today, my clients will ask me, what do you do? And they're there to see me from their feet. So podiatrists are much like specialists of the feet and legs. So if you have any pain, whether it's on the outside of your foot, say your nail or skin, or whether it's inside, maybe your bone or your muscle or soft tissue or joint, the people you would want to see for that is a podiatrist, because then we would diagnose it and say, okay, this pain is coming. Maybe you have the simple stuff that is on the outside, is most common is ingrown toenails, fungal nails, warts, hard skin. And then on the inside, most common thing is plantar fasciitis, which is heel pain, bunions, Achilles pain, and that's all associated with the way people walk. So a lot of our treatments then steer into giving people orthotics to support their arches, doing exercises, stretches, a lot of talk about shoes. A lot of people wear the wrong shoes. And I can, I'm kind of passionate about helping people get better on their feet. So I could literally talk to you for an hour about what people are doing wrong and how they should change it.
Let's go into a little bit, because I need to ask you then. So the barefoot shoes, what are your thoughts?
Look, there's a place for them.
Yep.
The thing is, people like innovative ideas. And I mean, it's across the board with everything. So when they first came out, everyone loved the idea. Of course, we were intended as cave people to be walking and running barefoot. I mean, that's what they did, and that's what we should do. And shoes are stopping us from strengthening our feet.
Yep.
Okay, great. But we are not living like cavemen. We have concrete and pavements everywhere.
Yep.
And people are walking around really fast, whereas that doesn't typically happen when you're living in nature. You're not, power walking everywhere to get from A to B. So barefoot shoes have a place, in a sense. Maybe use them in a controlled manner, a few hours here and there, but don't make them your main shoe. Because what happened after they started coming out, and all the Nike Frees and all the very low profile shoes, then we started seeing the problems come through the door, and people incurring stress fractures and, painful heels, because all of a sudden there was nothing to protect them from the shock. So for circumstances whereby you are maybe doing a sport where it doesn't require a lot of high impact and repetitive, like running, then you could wear them, because they'll provide you a nice good grip and you'll have the mobility of your foot to maneuver it. That's good, that's fine. But if you think that it's just all of a sudden going to strengthen your feet, and you don't even naturally have your lifestyle where you have strong muscles, no, it's just going to be one less protective barrier you have, resulting in a high risk of painful issues.
So part of the reason, I use barefoot shoes, and part of the reason why I like them is just because it's got a wide toe box. And it's something that I really took for granted until you actually wear a pair of like shoes that are wide enough for your feet.
Oh, common problem.
Right? And then, because then after that you go back into like a pair of dress shoes as an example, and you're like, why the hell do I wear these? Right? And like, I don't know how females do it, like especially like those pointy shoes, the pointy heels. Like, yes, I know that there's, a little bit of room, but it's like sort of cramming your toes all together. And like, I don't know how that could be any good for you long term, right?
It's the most challenging discussion to have with clients, because a lot of clients may come in with issues on their toes, and you'll look over to the shoes that they've come in with. And you kind of, it's such a sensitive topic. It's like trying to tell someone that they need to change their perfume without insulting them. It's the same thing. You need to, a lot of people don't wear the right shoe. And it's funny that you should say this, because one of the things that my sister and I keep talking about is coming up with a brand of shoes that are wide enough. Because I have at the moment 3 pairs of sports shoes, and they still don't fit me right, and they're not wide enough. And these are good shoes like Asics and Brooks. And I feel that they're not wide enough. So you're right, the barefoot shoes are wide. That's a great thing. And more shoes need to be like that. And once you go there, you definitely don't really go back to what you were wearing. But it's a common problem, which is why they did a study in developing countries where they hardly wear shoes, say in Africa, I can't remember the country, and they found that they had far less foot problems. And it really came down to the fact that they don't wear shoes. Or I've seen them when I was there, it's generally they wear slippers and thongs. It's just the nature of their everyday lifestyle doesn't really make it suitable for shoes. But a lot of the problems that we incur is because of shoes, and they don't fit right. And having this discussion with a female is quite hard, because you'll be like, they'll come in with a hard skin on their little toe, and it's because of the shoe pressing on it. And you'll say, oh, your shoe's just not right. No, but it's comfortable. yes, but it may feel comfortable, but it's not really wide enough. Oh no, but they're very expensive. They're good quality shoes. And then like it's touching on that. Well, I mean, I'm not sure if the price translates to a good fit.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing to accept, and a lot of people don't want to wear wide shoes. So yeah, barefoot are great for that.
Well, so with one of the brands that I wear, like when they first sort of came out onto the market, it was almost like you're wearing paddles on your feet because there's like
So wide.
this bulby top, and it was like, you know, it was a little bit embarrassing at the start, but I sort of got over the embarrassment because I was like, look, at the end of the day, I don't care. Like I'm already seen to be like this really quirky kind of guy anyway, so what's the difference that I got these shoes that look like duck's feet? But then, you know, over time they've gotten better and better in terms of trying to, you know, taper the shape better.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's definitely a market for it because I remember I actually bought this pair of shoes. It was like an online thing. What's the name of the company? The Drifter Leather. And it was like basically they make like custom shoes. Like you actually have to send them a one-to-one scan of your foot, and they will like craft you the shoe. Like they open up for a specific amount of orders, and it was a pain in the ass because when I did it, it was like they would sell out in like 5 minutes because they'd only take like a certain order every month. And so, you know, me at the time was like, oh yeah, like I need to get dress shoes that don't look like duck's feet. So then I was like, okay, I'm willing to pay money for these because then I could wear them every day at work. And so when I did it, it was like I had to be up at like 2 a.m. or something, 3 a.m. in the morning so that when the orders opened, I could quickly go and place my order. And so, yeah, like I got a couple of pairs of those and they look good. They're nice leather, like and they just look like a normal shoe. Like when I changed to those, then people didn't really like look at my footwear and go, oh.
And how much did they cost you? Roughly.
It was in euros. I think it was like 150 or 200 euros. No, wait,
So about
150. So $300. Yeah, $300.
That's not too bad for a custom-made shoe, you know.
For men's shoes, it's definitely on the pricier end, right? Like I think.
Maybe back. And how long ago was this?
Oh, this is a few years ago. Yeah, it's probably like 5, 6 years ago.
Sport shoes now, if you want to buy a good pair of sport shoes, you're looking at between $200 to $300.
Yeah, you are right. You know, like barefoot shoes.
Relative to other shoes.
Yeah, barefoot shoes are like, you know, between 150 to 200.
Yeah.
But, you know, you get one good pair and like I just wear the same pair until they break and then get the next pair. But,
I mean, Izzy's is one brand I can't justify spending that much on.
Which one?
Is it Yeezys?
Oh, yeah, the Yeezys, Kanye's brand.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first time I heard how much they were, I was like, my eyes just opened up. Like, what? People pay that much for a pair of just normal shoes?
I'd like to. There needs to be like somebody in my shoe massaging my feet for that kind of money.
Yeah, exactly. It's got to be made out of gold or something in there. Gold laces, maybe.
So, one more question on feet before we move on, right? So, in terms of like toe mobility, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious about this because I think, you know, shoes obviously play a massive factor in this, but like I think about, you know, those people who might like have disabilities with their arms that learn how to use their feet to do a lot of things, and then their feet can develop so that like their toe strength is almost like a grip strength. I wouldn't be as good as a grip strength of the hand because toes obviously not as long, but in terms of toe mobility, like
I've seen those YouTube videos.
Is there like should there be a goal in terms of how strong your feet should be?
Well, in my opinion, as a general sort of observation I make, Australian lifestyle doesn't allow you to get strong feet.
Yeah.
Being that we're very much a sedentary lifestyle, office work.
Yep.
But even if you're working, say you have a manual physical work, you're then at home. It doesn't have this lifestyle whereby we need to do a lot of chores ourselves that strengthen us. And getting to that state of strong muscles naturally, it has to be an everyday action that you use repeatedly throughout the course of your life that gets you there.
Yep.
And I say this to a lot of people that when they ask me, you know, should I run barefoot to get stronger muscles, or, you know, they have really flat feet and they need to have stronger muscles to help. I was like, look, the reality is you're never going to get, even if I give you these exercises, you're not going to get the muscle strength that you need to help you stand straighter, because doing 10 sets or 3 sets is not really what is going to get you that much further ahead. One observation I made when I worked with people that have CrossFit fanatics, you know, when a person that goes to CrossFit, they're invested in it 110%. They go every day, do 2-3 hours, and they go all out. Like, God bless them. I don't know how they have the time and the energy, but they do it. And because of that, I notice that they do have a much better foot posture. And they work every muscle of their body. So it's not just a repetitive movement like people that run all the time, you know, which isn't really strengthening. It's just cardio. It has to be a lifestyle change. So when we talk about, you know, getting as strong as these people that can do, you know, great sort of finer movements that we can't, but they've been doing it for years and years and years, that we all have that potential, but ultimately we're not going to change our everyday life to do it. Yeah, one thing I noticed when I was in Kenya and Uganda, I was just shocked that I met this girl that was carrying the bucket of water, not in her hands like you and I would. Even then it would be really heavy. So it's one of those, I think 20 litres. No, she just filled it up to the rim and puts that bucket on her head and walked. And I was like, oh my gosh. First of all, I couldn't even carry it comfortably with my hands. But she just walked from A to B with it on her head. And that was common for her. And that was her everyday thing that she did. And I saw this commonly over there, whereby people, older even women, were carrying logs of wood on their head because carrying things on their head freed up their hands. And that became an everyday practical solution to their lifestyle, because they didn't have things to like wheelbarrow around, or a car or a motorbike. So it was making do with your body, everything that you can. And as a result, what I noticed over there is they all have a very upright, straight body, not as, you know, a hunched frame as they walk. And this is because they use their body every day with every sort of action to its full potential. And that's the same with the toes. Yeah, definitely. You can get them very strong, but you have to work them every day. Go around, pick up all your kids' toys off the floor with your feet, and I'm sure you'll start seeing something change.
I pick them up with my feet, but not in the way that you're expecting. It's like stepping on a piece of... it's like stabbed into my foot.
Yeah, try it. Now you can exercise those feet with the kids' toys.
Fair. All right. So from after you finished podiatry at uni, so did you go straight into working in a clinic, or what?
Yeah, so I went straight into, I worked at the city and then Bondi Junction for 4 years. And then I bought over a clinic at Miranda. So it was a clinic whereby I was working for them already. I was familiar with the clinic setup, but the owners had to relocate back interstate. So they said, would you be interested in buying it? And I was like, yeah, perfect. It's kind of the next move I wanted to make anyway. So then that was in the Sutherland Shire. And then I owned that for 5 years before I realised I wanted to start veering into humanitarian work. And I couldn't do both at the same time. Either my business will, you know, be compromised. So, and I don't want to sort of, I'm very much a completer, and I always like to succeed in everything I do. So for me to just sit back and let a business run cruise control it would be too disheartening. Like, it's got to achieve its full potential. So it was best to sell it and then move on and do what was interesting me. What I was interested in, and that was humanitarian work. So then I went away for a year once I sold the business. I travelled for a year, did volunteer work, came back. I really liked it, and I thought, now I really have to somewhat make a decision what I want to do, because moving forward, I need to decide how am I going to progress in this. So then I decided to look for work in humanitarian positions. And a lot of the international organisations require higher degrees than just an undergraduate. So then decided to do Masters of International Public Health. And then I picked up also Masters of Infectious Disease Intelligence. And I did that together. And that was at University of New South Wales. And did that in 2019. Yeah. And
why,
did that
why
full time.
Why those two particular degrees?
Because my background was already health. I needed to sort of integrate something into what I already have. and then I can find work in the scope of health with international organizations. And that would help me then progress to merging health with humanitarian work.
Yeah.
I looked at other things, but you needed an undergraduate degree that was relatable to them. So it wasn't going to help me out. I would have had to go ahead and do then maybe 4 years of study to make up for an undergraduate degree I didn't have. So I decided it would be better, since I've already got a lot of experience in health, just build on that.
Yeah.
International public health was because I was looking at doing international humanitarian work. So it made sense to pick that.
Sure.
And then once I got invested in it, I thought, well, what's another few subjects, and then I can get a dual degree.
Yep.
And infectious disease intelligence was, once I got into it, I realized I like to learn more about certain things. I should have been really an undercover cop in my, in my past life. Or if I had to live again, I think that's one thing I'd like to do. I love investigative work. Yep. And there's a lot of things involved with that, whereby you have to think and investigate. If the origins of a disease start, how did it start? Where did it come from? What is the nature of it? And surprisingly, I completed those 2 degrees right at the beginning of the pandemic. So it couldn't have come at a better time. Yep. I already had built up this knowledge, built up all this theory, and I was like, I'm so confident. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go. Does anyone want to hire me? But then everything went into lockdown. No one was moving. So surprisingly, with that skill set, it was even harder to get a job overseas because everyone had come to a standstill. But it definitely helped me understand the decisions being made on a national level with COVID. And I felt I was confident to say I'm knowledgeable enough to question or be critical of the decisions made. So I wasn't just sort of going off maybe tabloids or newspapers. I was actually
something
already
that you just studied, right?
Yeah, like I just studied this.
Yeah.
I know exactly what a pandemic involves and how you would want to stop it, and but I didn't agree with the government's decisions by any means. So it was really frustrating then to have this knowledge skill set, to be in somewhat, I wasn't experienced in it, but I felt confident enough, like I aced it. I graduated with excellence. Yeah. I got a high distinction. So it's not like I'm a failure. Yeah. And then you come out and you provide an opinion to someone. Yeah. Oh, what would you know? Yeah. And I'm like, well, I think I know more than you because, and so the fact that you had members of the public that absolutely had no background in health. Yeah. In fact, maybe they didn't, let's just pick worst case scenario. They didn't even have a job. Like their background had no experience in anything. Yeah. But if you provided an opinion that was contrary to the government's decisions or what the government's experts had advised, you were like, ridiculed for your opinion. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't understand. Since when does someone that actually learned something is so ridiculed, but yet I just wrote all these essays and papers that were getting all these marks that were, praised. So it was really a really sort of interesting learning curve to understand that sometimes the world can indicate to you, no matter how knowledgeable you are, society can quickly revert back to a behaviour which is very discriminatory, even if there's no logic behind it. And so I think as a society, have we really advanced compared to maybe what actions have happened 50 years ago or 100 years ago? Yeah, so that happened in the pandemic. And then as soon as the pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic, I had already scheduled to go overseas. Oh, wow. So for the first year of the pandemic, I was already in Africa, in Kenya. And then 2 months into it, the borders closed. And then I stayed on 6 months there. I was working anyway as a volunteer, so it didn't really, I wasn't trapped there. Like I was feeling productive. I was being a volunteer, which was my aim anyway that year, to spend it overseas doing volunteer work. But then once the borders open, I thought I'll try and come back to Australia because that was now the only choice with the situation.
Yep.
It's too risky to move anywhere. At the time, it was August, and there was also the explosion in Lebanon.
Yes.
And I thought, do I go there and help or do I go back to Australia? It was a bit of a predicament because I was itching to go there. But I thought, that's not going to be the smart move. It's better to go back to Australia. So I booked my ticket, got on the flight, but, Etihad had still suspended its flights out of Nairobi at that point. So they said, make your way to Cairo, which is then suitable from there. Get your own ticket, go there, and then we'll transfer your ticket and get you back from Cairo to Sydney on the same ticket. And I said, no problem. So bought a ticket through Egypt Air, got there, and then I went to the boarding gate, and gave my ticket to Etihad. They go, where's your PCR certificate? And I was like, what do you mean? They go, well, you need a PCR test to board the plane. I was like, no one told me this. Like, this was right at the beginning of all of it. I said, well, why wouldn't you put it in an email or anything? I mean, I've spoken to you guys 2-3 times.
Yeah.
Whole rigmarole, tried to get out of it. They wouldn't budge. Just sat there. The flight took off and I'm just stuck in Cairo airport. He didn't tell me what to do or nothing. And I was just left there. And I was like, at that point, so stressed out. I was like, what now?
Yeah.
I've just got my luggage. I've got no way of getting back to Sydney and I'm just stuck.
Yeah, in Cairo.
Yeah, in Cairo. And then I was like, what do I do? So I went to the customer desk and I said, this just happened. What do I do? They go, well, it's up to you, but you should go back to Kenya. I was like, what do you mean? I just came from there. They go, well, what else can we do? We're not responsible. You figure it out. I was like, well, can I get a PCR test? They go, no, because you need to get one, you have to leave the airport, and you can't leave the airport if you don't have a PCR test. I was like, so what do you mean I'm stuck in the airport? They go, no, you can maybe go to another city, like anywhere that doesn't need a PCR test. So I got online, I started looking, what city can I go to that doesn't need a PCR test? And then all of them need a PCR test. And I thought, oh my God, I can't get a PCR test because they don't have the service in the airport and they wouldn't let me leave the airport.
Yep.
And I was stuck, and then I was like frustrated. I was crying. I was telling them off. I was like, I don't understand this.
Yeah.
It makes
Can't
no
even leave
sense
the
to me.
airport. I'm already here.
Yeah. I was like, this is really and just way ridiculous. Like right now, I have no choice. I need to leave this airport, but you're telling me I can't leave without the test, which you can't provide. Anyway, long story short, after 2 days of being stuck in the airport and no one budging, they put me on the next flight to Kenya. And so I got to Kenya, and then they told me, oh, you've got to quarantine now for 2 weeks. And I was like,
wow.
I just left. I haven't even really gone anywhere.
Yeah.
And the doctor on duty was really like just dry and mean. And anyway, he wouldn't budge. So another frustrating moment. I was like, I'm so fed up with this. I'm really like, this isn't a good start to, going home. And then anyway, doctors changed shifts. A new doctor was nice because he was overlooking he was like the health checkpoint. He said, don't worry, you can leave without quarantine. Anyway, at that point, then I needed to book another flight back to Australia. But the next one was like 6 weeks later.
Oh, wow.
I thought, I can't wait around for 6 weeks. That's too long.
Yeah.
So then that was the point. I decided, that's it, I'm just going to go to Lebanon.
Yep.
And then I got there and I stayed there, did volunteer work as soon as I got there. I did my quarantine of 3 days, started volunteering, and then...
What was that like?
It was a very last minute decision to go there. I wasn't planning, but it was surreal to see the damage from the explosion. I volunteered with the Red Cross, and we were doing door-to-door knocks and getting them to fill out a questionnaire whereby, you're asking them what their needs are, because with all the statistics and the information and their details, you then it all gets collected, and then they know how many people need cash, how many people need medicine, so it could prioritize how they distribute the donations.
Yeah.
But the stories that you would, hear door to door, it took me to another whole world. People telling you that they were out on the veranda, next thing they knew, their body was just
Thrown
thrown to the other side of the room, or, you know, the family that they'd lost and died. And there was a lot of shock. People that told you, you know, they kept their windows open or doors open, very minimal damage because the pressure could escape. But those who had all windows and doors closed, it was like a champagne bottle in there. The pressure had to escape and it couldn't, and just blew up in the apartment. So there was a lot of degrees of damage, and the key critical point was who left their windows open. It's something you don't think about, but that day it mattered, and whoever had them closed experienced a lot more damage. But did that for 2 weeks, and then I moved on to another NGO, and that was working on the disaster zone. And it was right in the radius of the where the explosion happened, and that was horrific. You don't appreciate the effects of pressure until you see what that explosion did, because it was simply pressure that did it all. And the pressure from the ammonium nitrate that exploded just pretty much travelled from, like, it went like maybe up to 8 or 10 kilometre radius.
Wow.
You know, and even where I was living at the time with my auntie, damage was that far. And you'd see cracked windows and broken windows from buildings, but a lot of things collapsed, and it's still there, and it's collapsed, and a lot is rebuilt. But the stories of the people is what really, like, breaks your heart. Just one moment they're there, and the next minute a wall has collapsed on their family members, and they're just dead right then and there, all in a heartbeat. Or there was an old lady I got to know, and she told me by chance she'd left that apartment just that morning. And I was like, oh, that's so close. That's a really close call. Lucky you left and went to the village where your daughter lives. Then later, when I got to know other neighbours in the same building block, they go, no, she was actually here, but she doesn't remember. She had been walking through the staircase, so the explosion happened. She didn't get injured in her apartment, but because she was just walking down the staircase, she had managed to escape the damage in her apartment, walked out, literally was getting helped back to some assistance by a man. And I only came to know this because I came across her picture in the paper when they were doing all the, you know, media coverage on it. I was like, hang on, I know this lady. She was here. What? She told me she was gone, and she couldn't remember a moment of it.
It's too traumatizing.
And her apartment, we were helping sweep up the glass, and, you know, because she eventually wanted to come live there. But her apartment, had she been in it, she would have been dead for sure, because it was just smashed, like nothing was there at all.
Yeah.
So a lot of beautiful stories that help you appreciate life and safety and the courage that these people have, that they could still smile and, you know, just be friendly and talk to you without constantly whinging. And you felt like, wow, you're just so resilient that it's admirable. And so I was very much, I think, inspired by their response to the disaster.
Yeah.
That I came back feeling like I want to become like them. I want to become that person that doesn't let life's, you know, drama or worst case scenarios tip you over to the point where you don't even want to smile. So I found that they were so inspirational. It really kind of shifted my focus on what it means to be a better human. Is it how you deal with such events, or is it with what you acquire, monetary or financial or success or power? So I look to people like that really bounce from such painstaking moments and come back and still have that fire in them to get on with their day. That, for me, proves your human nature to be of excellence. Yeah.
When you were there and in this aftermath, like, did you find that people were like sort of like grateful to God? Like, was there any sort of like, you know, like, was there any sort of like faith that helped them to get them through, or was it just very much
Yeah.
like I'm always very curious about that, because I feel like when times are tough, that is when people usually typically turn to, whether it's God or whoever they, you know, whatever faith they are, that's where they typically turn, and that happens when times are tough. You know,
Yeah.
it's an interesting thing, because I feel like it's one of those things that you know, when times are good, you always forget, right?
True.
But when times are tough, that is what typically, you know, and sometimes people are angry, right? Like they'll say, oh, why would God do this, or why would God allow this? It's not necessarily God's choice, right? Like it's we as humans make choices.
It's you raise a really good point, because I mean, I'm of a Catholic background, so and I try my hardest to always uphold my faith and values. You know, I go to church every Sunday, I try and pray daily, and I try and live by what is morally right. But then it's so easy to turn around when things don't go so good. And you're like, well, I don't know, does God exist? Like, why would he let this happen then? And it's a question I would sometimes maybe be confronted with by people that are non-Catholic. You know, well, if God does exist, then why are there so many poor people, and why is there so much poverty? And then through my time of being around diverse communities and seeing hardships of all different scales, and I'll take it back to the people in Lebanon too, but what I've realized is we often look to, when bad things happen, God doesn't exist. But we don't say, well, the good things are happening, then God does exist. So for that moment, I think for the ones that did survive it, they're like, well, they were grateful that they were able to live through it, that they didn't die like their neighbor. So they survived it. And yes, they do question their faith, like not their faith, but they have moments where their faith just depletes a bit, because how much can they go through, you know, with all the civil wars, the government is corrupt, they don't have always, you know, even the necessities like electricity and water and all those things. And then, you know, just before they know it, an explosion happens that blows their home apart and shocks them for the rest of their life. But then they resort to their faith to help give them, I guess, for every person, they need to have something in sight that gives them hope. And they come back to their faith as the point where they are hopeful God will get them through this. Because if it wasn't for the fact that they believed there was God to help get them through it, then they would be overly anxious about what tomorrow brings. So they trust tomorrow because God's going to be there. And Lebanon's made up of primarily half Muslim and half Christian, Catholic Maronites mostly. It doesn't matter if you're Muslim or Catholic. They both have the same faith or dependency on faith to try and get through to the next day. And my personal belief is that's what's allowed the Lebanese people to stay resilient, is because they've had faith for so many years to say, well, it's okay, you know, just everything will be okay. God's watching over us. And they've managed to get through so much because they've always relied on God. And yes, it hasn't always meant the best outcome, but had it not been for them having the faith, they would have ended up maybe being in a situation where there was no longer family units there. I mean, the family unit is very strong. They would have maybe decided, you know what, throw in the towel. I'm not even going to be good anymore. What's the point? Let me just go out there, deal drugs, or let me go out there and just, you know, rob people. But people still uphold their morals because they have a belief that God's there and he's going to look after them.
Well, see, I think that's one of the underlooked values of suffering. Like, it's not, of course, it's horrible when people suffer, right? And I think everyone, you know, would love to be able to click their fingers and say, oh, there's no more suffering in this world. But I think when it comes to testing people's faith as well, there is no greater tool than suffering. You know, it's like how your parents love you as a child, right? Like, you know, when parents love their children, we always typically say that's like an unconditional love, where, you know, 99.9% of parents would happily give their life for their child, right? And then, you know, on the flip side though, as a child growing up, you probably don't really understand what that concept means, especially when you're young, that, if something was to happen to your parents, would you give your life for theirs? And so I feel like it's just one of those things that, when people, I think people undervalue the lessons that can be gleaned from suffering, and it's not so much to say, oh, I'm grateful that I'm this or that or whatever. Like, I think that's one thing, but I think it's almost like it's like a little bit of a test of how true is your faith, right? Because if you really had faith, then no matter how bad the suffering is, no matter how tortured you might be or downtrodden you get, you'll still hold on to that faith. And that testament of your faith is like a testament of your love, right? Like, if you really believe in God or, whatever you believe in, and you really hold these things to be dear to your heart, no matter how tortured you are, you're still going to hang on to those things. And that's truly what faith is, but if at the point where, you face some form of a hardship and suddenly you turn, well, how strong was your faith to begin with? How true was your love to begin with? So I think that's the undervalued lesson, I guess, that suffering sort of yields. I want to go back to a point that you made, though, just in relation to, the human condition and forgetting things, right? Yeah. And I want to talk about this because, it's sort of really prevalent in my mind, because I've been there's a series of books, the Dune series of books. I don't know if you've seen the movie or read the books, but it's originally by a guy named Frank Herbert, and his son and another author also wrote a series of books in that series. And I think when I first was rereading these books, because I probably gleamed over them when I was a kid, and my brother used to have this computer game that was a Dune computer game, and so I sort of knew a little bit about the world. But I really sort of delved into these books again only probably a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago now, and it was really interesting because I feel like even though it's a fictional world, the way that they sort of dissect political machinations, the world, history, all of these sorts of things. And yes, it's fictional, but there are so many parallels to how we as humans are operating in this world. And, even to talk about, people getting almost like, so impassioned about this particular belief or this particular ideology, like in this series of books, basically, to sort of give away a little bit of the storyline, but there was a point where humans had developed technology so that AI essentially took over, right? And so rather than humans being the masters of technology, technology became the masters of humans, led to a massive war. The whole of humanity unites to obviously defeat this threat from AI, or the enslavement of people from artificial intelligence. And it was very interesting because even though these worlds or planets that have been governed by artificial intelligence and computers and technology would sort of treat people as slaves, there was varying degrees, like there was still a caste system, so to speak. But then on other worlds where there was no influence of technology, humans would still have slaves as well, right? Yeah. So it's like, there's this real polarizing aspect, and it's like, okay, to defeat the machines, there's still humans living on that world, but we're going to nuke the entire planet to kill everything, including the computer, the Evermind on that particular planet. So at a massive cost of human lives, we go and fight these wars to fight this, enemy that we see or whatever. And then you remove that enemy, so now it's like it's no longer technology. And then there was like two very distinct mindsets that came out of it. There was people that were like, we cannot allow any technology into our lives. We want to sort of go back into like almost like the caveman days. You want to try and unlearn how to make fire and all this sort of stuff. And they like this, there was like a movement that sort of almost became like a religion, where no technology is good. But then they couldn't see the contradiction that, to travel between different planets, they would have to use technology. They couldn't understand the contradiction that, to fight wars or fight other people, they would need to use technology, in terms of weaponry and all this sort of stuff. And then there was, this other side that was more logical and rational in their thinking that, we can use technology. It's not technology that's inherently evil. It's the person that is wielding that technology, right? And so I feel like, there are so many parallels to what's sort of happening in our world where, like there's this very political lines drawn that almost become religious, where you can't comment on anything because if you comment on, whether it's LGBTQIA plus whatever, you become a bigot.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
Or you're a homophobe, or you're one of these things, or you're an anti-vaxxer, or you get immediately labelled with these things rather than having a nuanced conversation about it. Yeah. And so that particular part of the book, it really struck a chord for me. Just thinking about how people get swept up in this ideology. They would say a line. The line was, "The mind of man is holy." That's the sort of the saying that they would use to say that you wouldn't even be able to have this podcasting equipment, not allowed to record this conversation. But we could go and have a machine gun to go and gun down the people that would want to use technology, right? So there's all these. It's just funny that there's so many contradictions in any ideology, right? And that's why at a certain point having all these labels is actually not helpful.
I'm totally behind everything you're saying, because that's something I sit there and reflect on. So I think a lot of even fictional movies, of course, they are somewhat surreal. You always have a hero and your villain, but their content is also paralleling a lot of issues that are happening in our world. And when you look at how many foolish people are in the movie just copying or doing along something that, may not help the good person, and then eventually the good person prevails and everyone believes it. And it's like, wow, that's great. They all come from somewhere, those stories. And I saw a lot of that during the pandemic, but now it's even still carrying on with other agendas. And because of the Pride month, we've had a lot of, headlines associated with that. And it's really disheartening when you see that the media has a big responsibility and needs to own up to also contributing largely for a lot of the divisions that are happening between groups, because, people of whatever choices they make, being Catholic, there are a lot of gay people in the Catholic community and they've never been ostracised. They are just like anyone else in that community. They'll still go to church because they still have faith and believe in the religion in itself. And their sexual choices is something that is not within their control, and that's fine. But there's many such members in every religion, being Muslim, being Hindu. And so no matter what, across the board, such members have never been ostracized. They've never been ridiculed. But all of the sudden, it's twisted that, we have to create a division. You're either one or the other. And it's like, no, you can be both.
Yep.
And no one needs to hold any bad feelings towards anyone else, but respect is on both sides. The other day I was at church and there was a young priest doing the mass, and he was filling in for the normal priest, who was away for 2 weeks. And it was a Sunday 10 a.m. mass. And as he was doing his sermon homily, everyone hears this ranting going on outside the church. And it's like, oh, okay, what's going on? It was a female voice, and she was ranting on. You can tell she was sort of trying to say abusive words or insulting words. But I couldn't make it out because it was just outside the church, so it was a bit hard. And then the priest had to stop because it was so disruptive. And he's like, okay, just ignore her and just try and continue focusing. But then she decided to walk around the church and try and walk in from the back. And at that point, she was still ranting and yelling, and everyone turned their heads to see what was going on. But a few of the members stood up and decided, okay, I think enough's enough. And they somehow deterred her and pushed her away. And then the voices, were silenced and you couldn't hear her anymore. So she must have then just been told to go, and she did. But later, throughout the Mass, as he got to the point where he was then doing the Holy Communion, which is a very, sacred part of the Mass, because the Holy Communion is, we believe it's the blood of Jesus. The body of Christ, Jesus, yeah. So it's a sacred thing. And so as he was holding it, giving his blessings, he started to pause and his voice became broken. And then it kind of, you could hear it because it's a microphone he's speaking into as he's saying the words. And you looked up because everyone at that point was kneeling and, you know, bowing their heads through the sort of that moment. You looked up and you noticed he was holding tears back. And he was trying to avoid, you know, not almost crying. You know, it's that point where he's breaking and he's not sure. And so his voice kept breaking and then you could see his eyes welled. But he held back really well. And he finished and he continued I don't know exactly what that part of the Mass is called, but he continued and finished that part. And then he composed himself and got through the Mass and finished. And then what had happened was, because that lady, he heard the words that I didn't hear, but my sister confirmed later, and she was yelling out, calling him pedophile. And this was just on the back because she's anti-Catholic and thinks anyone that's a priest is a pedophile because the church is assigned this label by anyone who doesn't really support it. And it's in the Pride Month and it's just this anger. And I thought, my goodness, what has been the outcome of that verbal abuse? It resulted in nothing but hurting this young priest's feelings. He'd only literally just, finished his course 8 months ago.
Yep.
He's only just stepped in. Wholeheartedly, a wonderful priest, speaking with such enthusiasm. But then out of nowhere, this lady pops up and starts calling him a pedophile and abusing him. And it hit a soft spot with him. And I thought, why in this day and age do we need to resort to this? And at that moment, I thought no one would ever make a tabloid out of this, that someone is abusing a priest, but it's always vice versa. And that's when I realized the media has a role to play a lot, because they are very biased in the way that they project things. And they feed anger into groups, and the groups keep buying that. I think it's important to just sit back and say, I'm not having any role to play anymore in what the media is trying to tell me to do. It's not going to tell me and dictate how I feel about anyone else. And it's really important to be mature and be courageous enough to say, my feelings are not going to be dictated by the media. Unless someone has directly hurt me, I have no reason to just stereotype and generalize and hate a whole community. And it goes both ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think in that regards, the media is very responsible. But yeah, there's been a lot of anger as a result of that, particularly on the back of, Cardinal Pell's funeral. That turned violent. And I thought it was inappropriate for the council to approve a protest during a funeral, because that was only going to flame up an underlying issue in the wrong way, and it wasn't necessary. So, yeah, I don't think I have bad feelings towards people sometimes reacting a certain way. I think they're just vulnerable to being manipulated by the media and by groups, and then that determines how they respond to anyone else, which, I think we need to be above and beyond that.
Well, all that happens is that, if you get into this tit for tat, it becomes an escalation.
That's
it's bound to escalate, right? Like that's all that happens. Whereas I think, if people actually just sit down and, for lack of a better saying, but break bread with each other and actually have a conversation, you realize that you actually have a lot more in common than you don't.
Oh, definitely.
Right? And, it's just in terms of how you express things, I think people can always misunderstand how certain things are expressed. But once you actually have the person there across the table from you and you actually have a physical, interaction, I think most people find common ground.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. That was a thought that ran through my mind.
Yeah.
Had this lady, whoever that was ranting on and abusing the priest, had she just taken 5 minutes to sit with him and get to know him, and realised how nice he was, how encouraged he was to help others, would she have still done it again? And she wouldn't have, because no full-minded person would abuse someone that they came to know is genuinely a good person.
Yeah.
And we need to do that. We need to just
We
get to know each other.
Yeah, we dehumanize other people because that's they call it othering, right? Like you make them the other, then it's very easy to justify your actions. So a great example would be like, I think if we think about morality, almost everybody would universally say that killing would be wrong, right? But then what we do is, and especially like when you think about tribal groups, right? If you were to ask the people within the tribe, and I'm saying, when I say tribal groups, let's go back, 500 years or something like that, and you go, okay, would you kill this person in your tribe? Most people would say no, like they're my tribe member, it's wrong to kill, right? But then if you were to say, oh, what about that guy from that tribe? And be like, oh, that's okay because he's not human. Like that's someone else. That's not. They're not somebody from my tribe. They're not human. We turn them into something else so that we can justify that. Oh no, we've always killed those people and they've always killed us. So we turn people into others, so that then it's very easy to then justify our actions to go, well, oh, you're a Catholic. Oh, you're a pedophile, or like, and it happens no matter what way you look at it. But we always looking. I think there's this part of human nature that by giving somebody that label and othering them, it makes it easier to then reduce their humanity.
And it's something that's happened over the years, and yet we still don't change our ways as humanity.
I think it's still
bizarre.
Something that's ingrained in us, right?
Yeah.
Like as much as we'd like to say we've evolved as people, we do it all the time. Anytime that and this, I remember this because I was sitting on the train once, and there was a lady, having like complaining to a friend about something, but like just in the language, right? Like it was like something happened, and so when you describe the person, the moment that you bring race into it, well, suddenly it's not just that you're talking about what's happened. You've made it racist, right?
Yeah.
Right. So it's like it'll be like saying, oh, this person stole from me, versus me saying this Asian person stole from me, right? Or this Lebanese person stole from me.
True.
Straight away, it becomes something different to, if your point was to say, oh, this got stolen from me, no problem. But now you've labeled a whole category of people into that just by adding that one description into it.
Yeah, and you know what? I have to say, I think I'm guilty of that sometimes. And you do it not
intentionally.
Not
think about it.
In a sense of giving a bad connotation to that person, but it's like trying to provide a picture and detail. But it's something we need to think more about. Like, would we have provided that detail if they were like us?
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe not. Do we always like to?
Well, it's like if your friend was Asian and you tell them about this Asian person stole from me. I don't think you'd use that language in front of your friend.
True.
Right? Like if your friend was Asian, but if you're two non-Asian people talking about it, or two non-Lebanese people talking about it, it comes out very differently. You know what I mean?
It's true. And I think that's something we need to think about is when you tell a story, you need to say it in a way that if you were speaking this way publicly or in front of the person, would you say it again that way? Or amongst, people, a group of people, would you repeat it in the same way? And it then makes you stop and reconsider, okay, maybe I shouldn't use those words, and because it's a habit that needs to be broken and it can feed a cycle. But having said that, you also don't want to become so bland that you fear even expressing yourself. Like sometimes words bring, emotion and colour and, just a sense of, I guess, dressing to your story, and you don't want to totally take away that flavour from a conversation.
Yeah.
But I think in certain things, it's good to be mindful of it. Like you said, if it's going to result in a bad sort of reflection unnecessarily, then why throw it in there?
Yeah.
Leave it. Yeah.
All right. I want to go back to the humanitarian thing. So what made you want to go and do humanitarian work? Like there's obviously something had to have influenced that decision.
Yeah. Through the church, there was a group that used to go to the Philippines every January, Maronites on Mission, and they're part of the Lebanese church. And they go to the Philippines supporting a Catholic, I guess, missionary there, whereby they help with dentistry, medicine, food, construction of homes. So they go there every January for 2 weeks, and they do this very crash course delivery of humanitarian work and then come back. But every year I wanted to join. I couldn't really because that's the busiest time of year for work for me. So the quiet period is usually February, which is when they don't go. So the 1 year I decided, you know what, I feel like doing this sort of work. It looks really interesting. I decided to do it, but then go on my own. And then I wanted to still maybe look into the same missionary that they're supporting, but instead of going to the Philippines, because they're supporting it anyway, what more value can I add as going there on my own?
Yeah.
I thought I'll go to another missionary, the same one, but they have about multiple locations around the globe. So I decided to go to Jamaica, where it was actually founded there and started there.
Wow.
So booked my ticket. I mean, you would think I should be quite knowledgeable about things because I move a lot.
Yeah.
But no, I kind of don't look into, and that's a habit I have. I don't read into things, and I don't do my research because I almost don't want to be deterred. I want my decision to stay put.
Yeah.
So I didn't look into Jamaica, and then I didn't realize I'd probably picked the most, unsafest place to travel to as a solo female.
Yeah.
But I went there, and they picked me up from the airport, which was fine, but that was the first feeling I got, it's a bit sketchy.
Yeah.
Sitting here waiting for the lift.
Yeah.
You got the vibe already, like, oh God,
Yeah.
But it wasn't long. They picked me up, and I went to the monastery and stayed there for 2 weeks. And they have about 5 different homes where they look after disabled or deserted people, but mainly disabled. And they've got men and females in different homes. So I decided, well, what can I bring to the table? I thought, I'm a podiatrist. I took my nail clippers with me. I took my equipment. And when I got there, at every home that we rotated every day, I just went around and did everyone's feet and tried to get through as many feet as I can. The bus would pick us up at 3 p.m. to make our way back to the monastery because we'd get there by the bus and they'd pick us up. I felt like there wasn't enough hours in the day. I'd be like, oh my God, I've got to move on. I've still got 10 more people and it's almost 3. And I thought, this isn't right. They're picking me up at 3. I should be here till 5, 6. This is too early.
Like a work day.
Yeah. And I was doing it wholeheartedly. And then, 2 weeks had been completed. And I thought, there was a feeling that I got there that I'd never had before. And it's a feeling of genuine happiness. You think you're happy, but when you go that next level of seeking true happiness, whereby you maybe give more of yourself rather than take, it's another level of happiness. And once I felt it there, I thought, wow, this is what makes me happy. This is what I want to do. So that 2-week trip was just the beginning and a taste of it. And when I came back, I decided I want to do more of this. And that's when I decided, okay, I'm going to sell the business. It took me 1 year to sell it.
Yep.
And then as soon as I sold it, the paperwork was complete. 2 weeks later, I was on a flight and I was off to East Africa this time.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was that. And the feeling never reduced or, fizzled out with time. It only got stronger. So my time in East Africa was with the same missionary.
Yep.
But it was mostly children.
Mm-hmm.
And that brought so much
experience
joy.
like?
It's just amazing. You can learn so much. In Kenya, the home was boys and they were disabled or to different degrees. They had about 60 boys that they look after in this orphanage. And every day you'd get up, you'd wake up at 5:30, you'd do the morning prayers, you do mass, meditation, have breakfast for a quick minute, and then you're off. And the day would involve me basically helping to shower, brush their teeth, feed them, utilize my skills where I can. If my health background could help and assist them, even though I'm not a physiotherapist, but I knew enough about the principles of the body that I could, transfer my knowledge to help with the children that had bad cerebral palsy and were sitting in a wheelchair. So I was there, and then Uganda. I was there for 2 months, and then Uganda for 2 months. It's the same missionary, but this time it was a girls' home. It was really amazing. We got so attached to each other that by the time I'd left, it was like I was leaving family. It was a home that was mixed of disabled kids and normal school-aged kids. the more time you spend with them, you realize the complexity of poverty. And it's not just about lack of money. It's so complex that even if you dumped $1 million, maybe
wouldn't fix the issue.
it wouldn't fix it. It has layers and layers whereby there's firstly a broken family, and then there's also an attitude towards, I think, and this is where it kind of touches on another topic, but this attitude of freedom to have sex without protection and leaving girls pregnant. And then the pregnant girl has the child, but she's so young and poor already herself, the child grows up again in the same way that she grew up. So then
it just restarts the cycle.
It restarts it every time. And the girls, you start to understand, they have never really felt love growing up. They've often been neglected by their families or, deserted. The first guy that comes along and throws a few sweet words at them, shows them a bit of affection, it brings out feelings that they've been longing for their whole life. And they become almost vulnerable to the next step and, engaging with the guys. And then just before they know it, the guy's left and she's stuck there and she's pregnant. And then the cycle begins again and she can't even feed herself, let alone feed the baby. And there's no extension of family, but there's not, of course, the system is corrupt. There's no real government support for anyone. And that's because at a government level, they do like what they do in Lebanon. They just take all the money, don't give it back to the community. So there's nowhere for these kids or adults to go that need help and support. And so then they end up feeling less or, develop low self-esteem and low confidence. They may end up just resorting to then the next guy that comes along and provide, feeling, okay, second time lucky. And it's the same story again. It's a really sad story. And over there, there's still a lot of taboos. Like there was a family of 3 kids in the orphanage, and they were all albinos. All 3 from an African mother, black African mother. And albinos are considered like witchcraft. So they look at them as their bad luck. So it was in their interest to be removed from their community. Otherwise, they were going to get hurt or something bad would happen to them. So the missionary took all 3 on board and helped them and kept them in the orphanage, even though they had grandmother or parent outside. But they weren't going to be welcomed or accepted. So it was important that they stay there. So, it's also sometimes trying to remove some of these medieval wife sort of superstitions is difficult too, because they don't have access to education that you and I do. Their public education there is so weak. I kind of sat there and saw how they were teaching in classes and what the kids were doing after school, like from their homework. It's very minimum. So it doesn't even allow them to graduate knowing how to navigate their way around getting more, learning more. So their views are very much built on whatever their community feeds them. But the biggest one was child discipline using, sticks and canes in schools is still accepted and common. And there was a time there in the orphanage, I was doing a painting on a wall as part of my work and project there, and I thought I'll paint a picture for them, that'll be nice, something I can leave for them and that'll colour up the place. And I was sitting there painting and there was, a bit of fuss, and the kids, I could tell they were all in trouble because, one of the teachers or supervisors was going off, but I didn't know what for because it was all in foreign language. Next thing I know, they were all, called forward to come forward, and they were all going on their hands and knees to get whacked by this big green stick. And I thought, this can't surely be on. Like for us, growing up in a society whereby it's not accepted and it's rare that even parents do this, to see someone in an orphanage and a supervisor hitting them, it was quite, confronting. And I was shocked, and I thought, how can this be happening? And I confronted the manager and I said, this happened while you're away. I don't know if this is acceptable or not. He goes, oh, no, it's not. I'll have a talk to her. And then I realized that sometimes they kind of tell me what I want to hear because I'm a white foreigner and they know our ways are a bit soft.
Yeah.
So they look at it as their ways are just not accepted, but they are, there's nothing wrong with them. But it made me realize that building, physical abuse on a child just then further embeds this sense of being unworthy. And then they come out feeling even like more lost. And so these are the small behaviours or changes that I witness from different ways that I think ultimately lead individuals there to not make the most or the wisest decisions for themselves, because here and there they haven't had enough love or they've been, disciplined too harshly. They haven't had enough food to keep them content to even sleep well, or an opportunity to get an education that allows them to. And even when they have an education, then there's not enough jobs. It's really complex, but if change has to happen, it's going to start from a government level.
Yeah. There's a great book, I think it's called The Rational Optimist. I don't know if you ever read it, but I think it's by Naval Ravikant. I really like his line of thinking, but basically one of the things that he talks about in that book is that property rights are fundamental to the fabric of society. So in countries where there aren't established property rights, where you can have due course of proper law to, contest anything that you want to contest in terms of property, then people just resort to stealing and killing each other for it. So that's one of the things. Or there is no aspiration, because if you can never own it, well, why would you work harder anyway?
Yeah.
Right? So in most established societies, there is an established rule in terms of law for property rights. So as a result of that, when we use the word opportunity, what are we referring to when we refer to opportunity? Typically, we're referring to things like education. But why do you seek an education? You seek an education for employment purposes. And why do you seek employment purposes? Because you can then obtain money. And what is money going to enable you to achieve? Well, it's going to enable you to achieve property. There's no point chasing an education and chasing money if you can't own anything, or if everything's communal, or everything's provided to you. Money then serves no purpose for you. Therefore, if money doesn't serve any purpose for you, why would you strive for any opportunity? That's why, I guess, if you think back to why they call, places like America and Australia lands of opportunity, it's because you have the opportunity to build a better life, so to speak. But what does that mean? That means that you can buy a house, you can have property, right? So, yeah, it's a very complex problem, and I'm no expert, but I thought that was a very interesting perspective, and it, when I think about it and contemplate on it, it does make a lot of sense. That in countries where there isn't really established property rights, I think that's probably one of the first layers in terms of people then having some form of aspiration. And then the next layer will then be commerce and trade, because once you have established property rights, then people want to buy and sell things to obviously make money and generate further opportunity, which then creates the next layer in terms of education and infrastructure and everything else that goes along with it. So
I think you're right in that regards. There has to be a goal for you to aspire to achieve. I don't know if it necessarily has to be land or property rights, but there has to be some sense of ownership of something. I noticed in Africa, in the villages, it's number of cows you have, because cows translates to property, which then you can use to exchange and trade.
Exactly.
Yeah, so there has to be some degree of ownership of something. But it's finding that balance with, I'm not sure, I'm trying to, in my sense, I think we're too far gone in Sydney towards ownership. To the point of owning a designer bag, which is a pet hate of mine. I hate designer handbags. I think for the simple fact that it's just everyone trying to achieve social status. I mean, which isn't necessarily, I don't know, a handbag doesn't really, for me, mean anything or value. it doesn't hold anything having some designer's name on there.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's trying to instill values that are worth owning, you know, and it's okay to have ownership, but own something that is of benefit to you and maybe the next generation and the generation after that, because you've got to leave a legacy behind. Your time here is limited on earth. So you're not going to take any of it with you when you die, but you want to reflect and say, well, all this hard work that I did, what benefit is it to humanity? Did I help then my children or my family have a better life because I worked so hard? Yes, then that made it all worth it.
Yeah.
But if you're only helping corporations get richer out of ownership, then is that really your goal, just to make higher profit margins for board members and for shareholders? I don't think anyone has that goal. So I think that's how I use my, you know, helps me to track my decisions or, you know, steer them.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful way to end this podcast.
Yeah.
So for those of you in the Canterbury electorate, Vanessa Hadchiti for the Lib Dems. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Johnny.